Say, Heidi, this is Lisa, and whenever 10 o'clock or 10:05 arrives and you're ready to start the meeting, we're ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Oh, and I just see you made me a co-host already, so thank you.
You're welcome. No problem at all, Heidi.
You are one step ahead of me.
Well, only today, so we're just off on the right foot here.
Awesome. Thank
You're
you.
welcome. Say, Heidi.
Yes.
I also wanted to mention, I'm not sure if on the agenda that you're looking at, if the city council rules comes before the brownfields
The
approval.
the brownfields comes first. I think
Yes,
Marty updated it or you
excellent.
did.
Okay, that sounds perfect. That way John can do the presentation because the other one might take a little longer. So
Yep.
thank you very much.
Awesome. We'll get John out of here.
There you go. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right, Lisa, is everything working on your end?
Yes, everything's ready, although we are having some issues with eScribe, so we might have to do some manual noting on the vote. So just bear with me as I use my pencil and paper.
Yep, we had that. I think that'll be going on all day. So we'll
Okay.
just
All right, sounds
we'll
good.
vote slowly. And then so I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. I think we have there might be a few people that are still joining us, but it looks like maybe Lisa, could you go ahead and call roll, and then we'll get started.
I sure can.
Thank you.
All right. So Stacy Anderson. Let's see, looks like Stacy's not here yet. Bear with me here. Boy. All right. eScribe is not cooperating with these either, so bear with me here.
Lisa, you'll probably just need to use that spreadsheet. Just read the names off there and
Sounds good. We'll do. We'll go from there. All right. So we'll say Stacy Anderson is not here yet. Okay. Mirta Becerra. Looks like she's absent. Mr. Carlino.
Here.
Okay. John Contos.
Here.
Jordan Hess.
Here.
Here. Gwen Jones.
Present.
Right. Kristen Jordan.
She's absent.
Absent. Okay. Mike Nugent.
Here.
Okay. Jennifer Savage.
Here.
Amber Sherrill.
Here.
Sandra Vasica.
present.
And Heidi West.
I'm here. Thank you.
All right, sounds good. So it looks like we have 10 members, 9 members present and 3 members absent.
Sounds good. And we'll keep an eye out for for Stacy Anderson, because I think she is probably planning on being here.
All right.
Okay, so the first thing on our agenda is just to approve the minutes from the 15th of December, and without objection, those will be approved. I will just note for the record that we don't have any public in attendance, so for the time being, we'll skip a public comment because there is no public to comment. So our first item of business, just in case you're looking at the old agenda, it was updated, and we are going to take the brownfields item first. John Adams is in attendance, and I believe he has a presentation for us. So I'll give him the floor and see what he has to say.
Thanks, Heidi. I'm going to try to share my screen, see how it goes. Are you seeing Missoula Brownfields program?
I'm not seeing it yet.
Well, we'll do without the visuals today then. It's not particularly important. My name is John Adams. On Monday of this week, I became the city's strategic projects administrator, but I previously served as the city's brownfields administrator in CPDI. And I'm bringing you something today from that previous work. So the Environmental Protection Agency manages a number of grants under the umbrella of brownfields. EPA defines a brownfield as real property, the expansion, redevelopment, or reuse of which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of a hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. So EPA's goal with its brownfields program is to facilitate the cleanup and redevelopment of properties that are potentially polluted enough to deter redevelopment, but which are not so polluted as to present an immediate public health threat like a federal Superfund site. Program provides grants or other assistance to states and local communities in a couple of different forms to either assess or to clean up properties. And Missoula has a long history of working with EPA's Brownfields Grant Program. We've attracted more than $7 million in assistance to the community over the last 2 decades. And we've turned that into north of $150 million of redevelopment with loans to support the cleanup of sites like the Sawmill and the Riverfront Triangle, and subgrants for projects like the Poverello Center, the Food Bank, Lee Gordon House, Burn Street Commons, River Road Farm, Partnership Health, and others. So in 2021, EPA awarded the city a 3-year, $300,000 assessment grant. Assessment grants can be deployed at eligible sites to identify whether there are any environmental issues with a property, and if there are, to characterize the extent of those issues. What problems do we have? Where are they? How expensive are they going to be to clean up? So one of the barriers to redeveloping properties in the city's core, properties that have been in use for many decades, is the uncertainty of whether there might be hazardous materials or a leaking gas tank buried in the property's soil or asbestos-containing materials in the building structure. The uncertainty of whether an older property might host those sorts of things is usually one of the biggest risks a developer faces with a redevelopment project. So if you're thinking about building housing, for example, on an old industrial property along the Bitterroot Spur, knowing whether you have $100,000 of soil cleanup or $200,000 of asbestos abatement or no environmental costs at all is really critical to penciling the project and obtaining financing. So the EPA assessment grant for projects with a clear public benefit is provided to us to try to reduce risk and uncertainty and pave the way for cleanup and redevelopment. So let me give you 2 examples of how we've used these grants in the past. The first is that a local nonprofit is housed on a former coal gasification plant across the river. And so we were able to use an assessment grant previously to evaluate potential issues at the site, cost out some potential remediation strategies, and help the nonprofit figure out how to best move forward in cooperation with DEQ and the responsible parties to get towards site cleanup. And the second example is that we spent most of the last assessment grant we received in 2018 evaluating the city-owned MRL Triangle, sampling and analyzing the soil for metals and hydrocarbons, doing an asbestos assessment of the structures, all so that we can get that site delisted from the state Superfund list and redeveloped. So for the 2021 assessment grant, these are competitively awarded. We won one in 2021 at the expiration of our previous grant. We need a contractor to conduct those assessment activities on the city's behalf. So you probably all know this, but when the city needs to purchase goods or services, staff does so according to the city's procurement policy. And procurement policy spells out based on what you're purchasing and how much it costs, how you'll select a vendor. So in this case, we published a request for qualifications, and then a staff committee scored the 6 applications we received. We then negotiated a contract with the highest scoring offerer, which was WGM Group, Inc. So the contract basically puts WGM on retainer for 4 years. And when we identify assessment projects, WGM will deliver them for us under a project-specific scope of work and a budget agreed on with staff. The assessment grant is 3 years and $300,000. Because these projects sometimes require additional funding or spill over into the next grant, or could be funded from another brownfield source we have, we set the cap at 4 years and $400,000. So no expenditures are guaranteed. It's all project driven, but this will enable us to be ready to do an asbestos inventory in the federal building, to evaluate soil contamination impacts on redevelopment scenarios at White Pine, to conduct due diligence on Marshall Mountain, tackle other projects as they arise. And as you know, any city contract greater than $25,000 requires city council approval. And so that's why I'm here before you today. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, John. I'm sad we didn't get to see your visuals to go with that, but I think you gave a really great background of both the Brownfields program and our procurement process. I see that we have a couple of questions. So Amber, you first, and then Daniel.
Thanks, and thanks, John. I appreciate the background on that as well. Even though we've heard it, and know it, it's good to remember it. And I think you kind of answered this for me, and what kind of basically some projects that you see coming forward. The federal building, I know, would be one of them, potentially Marshall Mountain. So Are there any other things that you see on the horizon? And Heidi, I'd be happy to make the recommended motion if you want that at this point in time. But I'd just like to hear more about what we have. This is a great program, and just what we have on the horizon, if you know that.
Yeah, we don't have a list ready. I think that almost certainly we're going to spend some money at White Pine. I think we're going to need the assistance of an expert to help us navigate what's going to happen exactly with the land treatment unit out there. Some of you may know there's a big pit full of polluted soil. It's lined. It's bioremediating, and so we're going to need some help identifying exactly what is going to happen with that, or how quickly we can hope to get it out of there. So I think that's probably that's the thing I see most immediately. But what we've typically seen with these is that we go in without a clear target, and we quickly find projects that really need the help. So I think MRL Triangle is another possibility, although we have a cleanup grant there, and I'm hoping we're going to be able to move to the cleanup grant, but there's still just a little bit of lingering assessment work to be completed with DEQ.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Daniel.
Yeah, my question was kind of similar to that. I was just curious if we are going to be needing more of these grants over the 3-year period. And I was also curious how that scoring process works that you mentioned with like WGM. I was a little bit lost on how that works. If you could explain further.
Sure. So we're always looking for more grant opportunities with the Brownfields program. And so it's possible that with funding from the infrastructure bill that we're going to apply for something else in the coming year. But it's really target dependent. Like, do we have a compelling proposal? Is the money available? Do we have a compelling project and a compelling story so that we can win, because they're all competitively awarded. And then additionally, you have to spend down what you have. So, we won an assessment grant in 15, couldn't apply again until 18. We won an assessment grant in 18, we couldn't apply again until 20, and it's awarded in 21. So there's kind of some lags there. But we do have plenty of assessment money right now. And I'd certainly encourage anybody who thinks they have a project that might be ripe for this funding, we can spend it both for city projects and for private entities, nonprofits. If there's a clear community benefit, it's worth talking to us. In terms of the procurement scoring, when you publish the request for qualifications, the RFQ, you identify the criteria that you're going to score on, and they're actually laid out pretty clearly in the city's procurement policy, which follows state law. For an RFQ for architectural and engineering, you're going to score on these criteria. You can assign different weight to them. You publish that as well. And then a committee of staff, so in this case, 3 people, score it. We come together, talk about the scores, make any changes if we feel like they're necessary, and then we have a result. It's straight spreadsheet work.
Awesome. Thank you, John. So we have a motion on the floor, and I just briefly wanted to add that the phase 1 and phase 2 is often a beginning step of almost any project. So, for example, the Trinity site, had to undergo this. We did one at Lee Gordon Place as well, just so that all of the costs were known up front. Although in that project, we discovered costs along the way due to lead contamination. Even if we don't, if we expend our funding locally, there often are pathways to get additionally funding directly from the regional EPA office. So just, we have to spend down our money to get more money, or there are other pathways that then open up for, housing developers, for example, if they need this assistance. So do we have any other questions or comments? If not, I think we can go on and vote on this item.
Hey, Heidi, we should, never mind, we don't.
We have no public in attendance. I should note that for the record. No one is here, even though this is a super cool item. So Lisa, let's go ahead and do a roll call vote. Oh wait, Jordan, do you have a question?
Well, I just wanted to thank you, John, for your work on the Brownfields program. This is really great work, and it's so great that Missoula uses this so extensively. I am I wanted to congratulate you on your new position as well. We're going to miss having you work on brownfield. This is heavy, dense federal regulation that requires a unique kind of attention to detail, and you've brought that over the years, and wanted to thank you for that.
I'm apologize. I just got booted out of our session, so fortunately, I don't have to blush because I think you may have been praising me, Jordan.
Yes, he was. And as my former grants administrator, I can, on a Brownfields grant, I can attest to your great collaboration. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I'm really proud of the work that the city and the county and the community have done on this program, and I'm excited to see who my successor is and how they take it in new and exciting directions. It's a really great source of help for the community. We've worked really well with nonprofits, delivering essential social services and housing. And I just want to remind people that it's out here, and you should come talk to the community development division at City if you think there's a possibility, and we can game it out. So, thank you.
All right. So, Stacy Anderson,
Yes.
Daniel Carlino,
Yes.
John Contos,
Yes.
Jordan Hess,
Yes.
Gwen Jones,
Yes.
Mike Nugent,
Yes.
Jennifer Savage,
Yes.
Amber Sherrill,
Yes.
Sandra Vasica,
Yes.
and Heidi West.
Yes.
All right, so that is unanimous for everyone in attendance.
All right, thank you. So we'll be taking up our next item on the agenda, which is the amendments to City Council rules. I hope everyone got an opportunity to look at, I guess, the discussion from last month and some of the things that were tagged, especially since we have 6 new council members who weren't a part of that discussion. And I would be remiss if I didn't thank Brian von Lossberg and Gwen and Jordan for spending an inordinate amount of time getting us to this point. And I think for today, I just want to point out that the goal is to keep it in committee. So there is no, this is purely a discussion. We have the rest of the almost an hour, I think, to talk about this. And I think if there are amendments people want to bring, the best thing would be to send them to Gwen and Jordan and myself in the next week or so.
Actually, Heidi, can you please include me on that? Because I do.
And Marty.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And Marty. So all of us, and maybe note, during the discussion, what you have in mind. So maybe I'll actually, Gwen, can I turn it over to you or Jordan to maybe lead this discussion just because you're the experts?
The experts in council rules. That's going to be on my tombstone. Yep, looking forward to that.
I'll make a note.
Okay. Sure, we can. We had a pretty robust discussion in December, and I think most, if not all, of the new councilors were able to watch that at some point, I hope. So really, what I've done on my second computer screen is I've pulled up the recap of the council rules discussion just to have that in front of me, and that's where we had additional thoughts to what we had put forth. And I think there was a lot of value in all of it. So I don't know, we can go through that, but are there, for new counselors or for anyone, was there something that you wanted to discuss? And Jordan looks like he wants to weigh in also, so.
Heidi, if I may, I'd like to, okay. I just want to say, I guess, kind of to set the stage for the new council members. I think that we have rules for when we need them. We generally are agreeable. We generally have, a fairly consensus-driven process, and things generally go smoothly. But we have rules for when things for when things go off the rails. And it doesn't happen very often, but it's really important that we have a clear way to conduct business. And so I would just encourage you all to think about rules from the standpoint of, it's kind of fun to think about hypothetical situations. Like, what if this crazy thing happened? How would it get resolved by following our rules? And so we wanted to bring the rules both to the old council and the new council in part to get input from people who had been using the rules for that were getting off or going off of council, but also as a way to expose new members to the rules and to have a discussion around like how some scenarios might play out. So I just encourage you to look at it with through that lens of when would this rule actually be useful? It's, it might be a scenario where there's a tie vote and you have to figure out how to proceed, or it might be a scenario where someone is not being respectful of a council member, or and Marty has a rich history of needing to use the rules for very bizarre purposes. So I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
And I'm just trying to think of how to constructively approach, well, Heidi, back to you, and then you can toss it to us when you want to.
Okay, sure.
Sorry.
I think I'll, whoops.
You're muted.
I accidentally muted myself, sorry. Sandra has her hand raised, so I think I'll go to her first, and then I have a couple comments about specific sections of the rules myself, so.
Thanks. I think if it's not too long of a list, Gwen, of the, I guess the points that people were making in December, I guess if it's not that big of a discussion, I would like to get a recap on what people were discussing, just the general overview of it. But if it's super long and robust, then I'll leave it to you guys.
Heidi, do you want me to just kind of go through the list?
Yeah, sure. I think some of them were very specific to actual just clarity of language. Some words being just a little, odd, and maybe could be clarified. But yeah, Gwen, I'll go ahead and let you go through it real quick because it is not. I think it's less than a page.
Great. Okay, I'll just do that. And if you have your agenda, I think it was the last thing attached to the agenda on this item. So just if that helps you track it, I think Marty attached it late yesterday. And I would preface this by saying, as we discussed in council in December, and then again this morning during chair elections, I do think we're looking at realigning the committees a little bit. And I think that'll take a couple of weeks. Jordan and I, reached out to some. Okay, I'm back. There we go. Jordan and I have reached out to some staff to get their input. And it'll just take a couple weeks, I think, to kind of get some insight from them, figure out how we could realign the committees and balance them a little bit better. So that is part of the rules process also. So we've got that going on. And then we've got our list today of what I'd call just separate little issues that people picked up on in December. And so we'll go through that today. I think a lot of these things are really easy to deal with. And frankly, the suggestion themselves was the resolution. And it's a question of kind of pulling that language in and just modifying the rules. We could modify the rules and bring that modified draft forward in a couple of weeks. But to go through it, the first issue was Rule 3, ex parte. I think we wanted to have just a better definition of ex parte and how that relates to land use decisions and what land use decision means, because there's different categories. So that can be fleshed out. And that was the issue spotting. I don't think we really need to resolve that right now. I thought that was a good issue to spot. And yes, more clarification is good because that is an area in which council needs to be very careful in terms of who they talk to regarding what topic. So we can, I felt like that was pretty self-explanatory and common sense and a great suggestion. Rule 4, decorum. There were some good suggestions on how to take some language and just make it more plain language so that it's easy to process. And I mean, indulgent personalities, impugn motives, how to just have some clearer language. And I think we're living in such an interesting era in terms of public information and how it's disseminated. We'll do the best we can to not infringe on free speech, but also deal with inaccuracies and misinformation and keep a professional working atmosphere. So there's a lot there to balance, and I think we put it in our rules as best we can. And then, I liked some of the suggestions in here. I think we'll spell it out more. And honestly, it's an ongoing work in process with every single public meeting that we have. So if people have other thoughts on that, do you want me to just keep going through the issues, Heidi, and then we can discuss more? I'm just like, blah, blah, blah here.
I think maybe it would be good if someone has something in relation, since we're going through it anyway, if someone wants to raise an issue or provide some feedback as we're going through the list, maybe that would be the cleanest way to do it, just so we can kind of track it like linearly. That would help me. So, Sandy.
So this is the part that I was mainly concerned with. I know that we're not going to use the phrasing indulgent personalities, and the way that it was explained is that it's basically no name calling. And I don't really agree with that. So if we do change language that basically says the same thing, but in more clear language, I probably won't be in support of that, because I believe that as elected officials, we're held to a higher standard and we should expect a lot of that. And like Gwen says, it is difficult in this day and age to have a proper decorum and maintain a level of free speech. But I do think that not allowing name calling is denying free speech. And I don't want somebody to not be allowed in council meetings for indefinitely because of something they said like 5 years ago. So that's one of my main concerns.
Stacy.
Thanks so much. And I, on one level, agree with Ms. Zika. I mean, obviously, we all in this space, put ourselves out there and expect a certain level of ridicule, and that's fine. I guess my concern is, because I was a part of this discussion in December, is two-front. I'm concerned about providing a public forum that's broadcast to disseminate, blatantly false information. Second, I also, the engaging in personalities, I agree, was not, it's very kind of old school language, but I also am concerned about making sure that people, and I feel like this is maybe more of a case when we're hopefully back in person together, but making sure that everybody who is attending the meeting feels comfortable in that meeting, not us, but the public. If there is people who are, really kind of pushing the envelope in terms of decorum, it may actually suppress other people's comfort level of like participating in that meeting, attending those meetings in the future. If they feel as though they are having an alternate opinion to somebody who's speaking, that they may be ridiculed for that. I can think of a couple of examples of when, especially around some land use issues, we've had some comments from people who, maybe were against, did not agree with the majority of the people who were in attendance, who were, on one side or the other. And there was some jeering that happened. And I think that, we were able to kind of squash that down. So I'm not so much concerned. I want decorum amongst us. we shouldn't devolve into name calling. Apparently, Marty can regale us with stories where that has happened amongst other councils in the past. I think that we can all be, disagree in an agreeable fashion. But my concern is really making sure that everyone who participates in our meetings feels comfortable, sharing their opinions, and that we do not provide a forum for folks to basically, be disseminating blatant lies. So how we craft that and thread that needle in this space, I'm open to discussion. But I think that's what I was talking about this in December, or where I was coming from.
Amber?
Yeah, thanks. And Stacey, I'm glad that you brought that up. I agree with Sandra on the front that I think that we are, as elected officials, expected to have thick skin and, expect feedback. I don't think that we should have a setup where people are in here cussing at us. I think that can kind of build on itself and become possibly an unsafe environment, which I'm not comfortable with. The other piece is exactly what Stacey said, is that, if you're in council chambers, and obviously it feels different when we're in these little boxes, but if you're in council chambers with your child that comes to see the process, or you disagree, whether, you agree with me or you disagree with me, we have to have some rules around making everyone, regardless of their position, regardless of their age, of their religious affiliation, all those things, comfortable being in chambers and giving their feedback to us. So I do think there were a couple, I've been in person very few times, but that there was an issue early on where someone dissenting from the majority of the public that was giving comment did feel very uncomfortable, and it took some guts to get up there with the ire that was going on, and that's just part of the process. But I think we need to be very careful about making sure that everyone, and I mean everyone, anyone you can think of, feels comfortable getting up and giving comment.
Back to Sandra, and then we'll have Mike's next.
Thanks. Yeah, I agree that I don't think that we should have, anger or cussing, bad language. When I'm talking about name calling, like I don't think that we should allow people like calling you like the B word or an A word, I think that is absolutely out of order. But if you call somebody an idiot, I think that should be allowed. And then I lost my train of thought. But I do agree with Stacey with allowing, and Amber, allowing having your children in there. Everyone should be comfortable with it. And I do believe that there should be a proper decorum between council members, and we all should treat each other with respect. But with matters to the public, I guess my main concern was, that's what I was going. Sorry about that. So I think that with the false accusations, I think that we should allow those. But one of my main concerns is like a back and forth. So like if somebody came on and said, oh, the earth is flat, and went on with that for 3 minutes, and we could have a council response if wanted, or if somebody like called out me for something, and I would like to have a response period, I guess, with public comments, because that's not really allowed right now. So I guess I wanted to kind of explore that avenue. Sorry, my kid's really distracting me.
It's all good. So I think traditionally, at least the way that I've seen the back and forth handled, is that during council comments, often specific issues would be addressed. Although I know that there's a lag between public comment and council comment, and often the people that maybe said something incorrectly or asked a question or made a statement that was maybe incorrect often aren't in attendance anymore, which I think is a disservice to everyone, because then people aren't learning from each other. So I'll go ahead and Mike was next, and then let's see who's next. Amber, and then Jordan.
So if a rule is being violated, is it the discretion of the chair to call it out?
I think anyone could call a point of order, anyone in attendance, and it could be any of us. And often, I know that I haven't chaired very many committees, but often it's actually easier for someone else to interject because we're often juggling multiple screens and there's just a lot going on. So Stacy is very good at calling points of order when needed. So
I ask because I have concern about the word impugn. And I just pulled it up here. No person may include indulgent personalities, impugn motives of members, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, the definition of impugn is to call out a falsity. So what if the statement by the counselor is in fact not true?
it's a good thing to note. I think that's language we highlighted last time around because it is maybe not as clear as we want it to be.
So I don't know if there's adding. I mean, I know like in the code of ethics in my professional world, it talks about you can't say untrue things or something like that. I don't have an answer, but I just asked the question. And my second question, and I assume this is more formality, when it talks about addressing through the chair, a public comment could still ask a question to specific counselor as long as they go through the chair, correct?
Yes, we've done that in the past where it's as someone on council can repeat the question to a staff member or yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Amber?
Those are good points, Mike. I just wanted to respond a little bit to what Sandy had said. And while I personally, if someone calls me an idiot, that doesn't really offend me that much personally. So, but I don't want them calling me some of the other things you alluded to. So, but I want to be careful as we think about that because, it brought back, I can't remember who it was when they said, what is pornography? And he said, I don't know, but I know it when I see it. What I consider offensive and what someone else considers offensive, like where is that word, right? Like, I mean, I think we need to be, if we just say you can't call us names, then we don't have to talk about any of the nuances of what that means to different people. I think we could also get into, I mean, we don't have a lot of diversity on this council, but I mean, that could, but we certainly do in the public. And, I think that there are certain words that you and I wouldn't find offensive because we are not Native American or whatever else. And I think that I just think we need to be really careful with what if we start talking about specific words, that is all interpretation is my concern.
Jordan?
Yeah, I think it's a good point. And I don't think that we specifically indicate that you can't call names. I think it's more subjective than that. I think it's more egregious than that. I mean, it specifically says using loud, threatening, abusive, indecent, or profane language, or to participate in conduct which disrupts, disturbs, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of a meeting. And so I think it's inherently subjective, and there's not going to be a situation where you can define really clearly in the rules that and this name is okay, but this one isn't. And I really appreciate what you just said, Amber, about the quote that you mentioned. I think that's kind of as clean as we're going to get here. Is I don't know that we're going to be able to define with absolute clarity what is and isn't appropriate. And our rules do provide for interpretation of the rules, and so a chairperson could make a determination on the rule, and then if the body disagreed, there's a way to work through that. So I'm comfortable with it. I like the idea of cleaning up some of the more archaic language, even though I kind of I've learned some stuff, and I've looked a few things up. I think it's probably better to have those be more just more readable with more modern language. But I'm personally okay with the intent, and but I do totally agree that there's a balance that we need to strike and continue to strive to reach.
Gwen.
Thanks. I really appreciate the discussion today, because it's a figuring out where to put the line is complicated. And I think a lot of the focus with this rule is people can say they disagree or they don't like what we're doing or whatever their opinion is. It's how they say it. So I think, first of all, that's a lot of these rules are getting to how they say it. And if they keep it relatively professional and on the merits of what we're discussing, that's the direction we're trying to steer them in. And sometimes emotions do run high and people go off the rails a little bit with public comment. And so this whole issue of how do we keep a good environment so that all feel comfortable coming in? Historically, the way it's panned out has been, if someone is saying something inappropriate, a point of order can be called. The chair basically says, you need to shut this down. You can't say this kind of stuff. And typically the person giving comment will regroup and go forward in a better mode, or they will stop commenting totally. I think we've only had 2 people trespassed from coming into council in my last 6 years in council, and it's when they have really, really crossed the line, caused a ruckus, been asked to leave, not cooperated. It's been very distressing and upsetting to everyone, and they can't come back in because it's not a good situation. But when it's a matter of just you're falling off the road here, get them back on a little bit. Typically there is cooperation from the public. So trespassing is a pretty high bar, and people have to have really crossed a lot of lines to ultimately get trespassed from council. So I want to make that clear. First of all, this isn't 0 to 100%. This is giving us some tools to keep the conversation going in a more professional way going forward. And the issue of misinformation and inaccuracies is the issue of the day in our era. And I think we'll have to figure out how we navigate that going forward, because there's free speech butting up against misinformation. So we'll handle that. I think we did talk about the fact that it's very difficult to have a back and forth with council because we haven't noticed those items. So there's state law that intersects that. But council comments is always an option. And sometimes things can be directed to the chair that can then be directed to staff. So we just have to navigate it as best as possible. But I'm kind of taking notes on this. And I think before bringing this back in a few weeks, we can look at the language and try and accommodate some of this.
And then Marty, if you could go first, and then we'll circle back to Sandra. Oh, I think you're on mute still.
I'm still on mute. I just wanted to, because I think we have a few new people here, and they might not know what it means to be trespassed from city council. So if folks really, really, really cross the lines with respect to decorum, Jim Nugent usually sends a letter and prescribes the way that this person can participate in other ways than physically attending a meeting. And so it's not that they're barred from participating at city council, it's just the physical presence in the room is usually the part that is trespass. So it doesn't mean that they can't email you, leave your voicemails, write you letters, but whatever the decorum violation is, usually that's been so egregious that they're not welcome in the room. And I will say that we don't permanently trespass people that I'm aware of. Jim might be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but it's usually for a period of a few months to kind of temper the situation, and so that's kind of how I think that has worked in the past. But usually it's in response to, we've had to adjourn the meeting in order to restore order, is usually when that situation arises, is that we, despite the attempts of all the members of the body to restore order to the meeting, the chair has had to bang the gavel, order the cameras off, and we stop the meeting. And usually that's the point where then further action is taken. Jim can expand if I've said anything.
And I don't think we've had, having been on the Zoom world for the last year and a half, I think some of the scenarios that I've experienced, we aren't running into them right now, but when we go back into person, we might. So it's just a whole different way of being in meetings than many of us have been experiencing for the last bit of time. So, Sandy, let's have this
I'll wrap it up
on this section, and then we'll move on.
Amber brought up a really good point, and Mike did as well, with the impugning motives of members. So I guess I would be happy if we could get rid of or change that language of no person may indulge in personalities, impugn motives of members, other members of the public or staff. I'm okay with the rest, so I'll wrap that up. Thanks.
All right, thank you. So maybe Gwen, do you want to? I can just move on. So the next rule we took notes on was on Rule 13, which was the consent agenda. And I just wanted to flag something on this particular section that I plan on coming up with maybe an amendment that I'm going to send to the rest of everyone. But my concern is around the new noise waiver. That's not just automatic for all projects. I think in probably 99% of the noise waivers we see, this makes perfect sense because they often come from Public Works or from a state agency that's working on, one of our state highways that go through the city. But every now and then we do see noise waivers that are private. And in that case, I would love them to stay in committee just because it also gives some extra notice to neighbors that a project is happening and that they might be disturbed earlier or later than they usually are by construction. So I think that's the only thing I want to tag, and I'll work on some language. Is there anything else in regard to the consent agenda? Gwen, do you have anything to add?
I think the one that I'm looking at right now is consider returning to have a preview of public hearings in Land Use and Planning Committee, which is the way we used to do it. So, for example, a big rezone comes through, it would come to Land Use and Planning first. Committee tends to be a different environment in which it's just more fact-finding, asking open-ended questions, trying to figure out all sorts of different things. I feel like when things go to full council, we still ask questions, but it's a little bit of it's a more structured environment. And having, for the last, year plus, we have actually previewed land use matters in full council first, then it's gone to committee, and then it's gone back to council. And I guess I'm saying I like the old way. I felt like it was a better rollout, but I feel like we should have some discussion regarding that today.
All right, well, Jordan's hand is up next. So since he's the land use and planning chair, and I know he's been experimenting with this, I'll turn it over to him.
Okay. I don't think we have to discuss it today. I would like to bring in land use staff and discuss it in the land use and planning meeting, because I don't think it's actually in our rules that we didn't change our rules to go to this new format. I believe it was spring of 2021, and we brought it forth to the committee as a proposal, and we said we'd try it for 6 months and see how people like it. I think there's pros and cons. I think for complex projects, it's probably worthwhile having a pre-public hearing item. I think for simple, a simple read or conditional use or something that's relatively straightforward, or maybe an annexation is a better example. we end up hearing the same presentation 2 or 3 times sometimes if with the old format. So so I'm really happy to have the conversation, but I don't and maybe Marty can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think it's actually in the rules or needs to be in the rules.
Yeah, I don't, you're correct. It really wasn't a rule. It's just a practice. What was new that we did that is being proposed to be in the rules is final consideration. So in the past, when we had a pre-public hearing, that sometimes was the committee's opportunity to discuss and flesh out matters. And then after the public hearing had concluded, you would vote immediately and take the matter up unless it was really complex. And then it would go back to the Land Use and Planning Committee, and if there was time. And so the situation that changes under this set of rules is you'll have a pre-public hearing, but the default is to always go back to committee after the hearing under the proposed set of rules now. So in the staff perspective, staff are going to appear before you 3 times on a matter: pre-public hearing, public hearing, and post-public hearing under the current rule set. So the current proposed rule set, I'll say, with the final consideration. So that's the difference from before. But you don't have to have a rule to have pre-public hearing or not. And so I think that's nice to have that discretion because, as Jordan says, some things are very straightforward and other things are not. And I actually feel like Jordan, as the chair, has a pretty good grasp of what's going to take you longer and what doesn't, because he's pretty darn good at scheduling the amount of time you need in an LUNP meeting to talk about things. So.
Stacy?
Thanks so much. So gosh, I didn't realize I spoke as much during the rules discussion as previous, but I brought this up as well. I agree with Gwen. Thank you, Marty, for the clarity on that. I liked the old way better. And mainly because, as I said previously, I feel like when we're in land use and planning committee, especially on these bigger things, and I think that Jordan's right, there's a way to sort of, decide between the two. But, on Wednesdays in committee, it's like land use. I have my land use lens on, and it's a way to kind of really dig into those kind of more weedy issues. And I like hearing it for the first time then. And then, asking questions and, we have a designated time for it. It's like committee is set for X, to run from 1 to 2:15 or whatever it is. Where on Monday night, when it's the first time you're hearing it, I mean, you're kind of, preparing for everything that's on the agenda. And you're also, more cognizant of the fact that if you really start into a back and forth with staff on an issue, yes, you will hear it again in committee, but it just feels like it's such a short window when it goes Monday, Wednesday, Monday versus Wednesday, Monday, that you're, that there are other things on the agenda, people waiting to present, people waiting to comment. So, and I realize that I appreciate Marty kind of explaining that it doesn't have to be codified in our rules. So maybe Jordan's right. Let's have it more of a discussion in land use and planning committee and figure out some sort of better guidance. And hopefully, I mean, I think a lot of it was a functionality of, trying to make sure that we had plenty of time for public to comment in the new format in which we are meeting. And someday we will be back to normal order, not necessarily on our Brady Bunch screens. The consent agenda thing is also one that I brought up, and it's one of the things that I, in my committee, try to be pretty rigid about, because I think that I don't like the practice of, something not getting a consent vote being placed on the consent agenda, and then the dissenting voices sort of using that, dividing the question. It makes it harder for Marty, because when she's doing the votes, that the consent agenda is all one on her end. and it also doesn't kind of give there is lacking the context of both sides. Yeah, it's hard because committee reports, when it's something that's not passed unanimously, is at the very end of the agenda. And so you feel bad for that staff person to be like, hey, can you come and sit through a Monday night meeting? Don't know when you're going to present. We'll see you when we get to that point. And I'm mindful of staff's time and commitment, and they are, Monday nights, are kind of a bit of we don't know from a time standpoint, but I like the, consent agenda being what it's intended to be and everything's agreed upon. And then if there is disagreement, having a little more space, which under committee reports allow to hear both sides of it. And so that it's like, okay, well, I disagree because of this, but here is the actual topic matter. And so that's why I brought it up in December, and would be curious on other people's thoughts on that. But
I just wanted to make a quick comment. I think I agree with everyone on the land use planning schedule. I love not having to see the same presentation twice, but I also understand that Monday nights I feel a little less comfortable asking questions, or don't necessarily, have, I don't know, the context of the question by Wednesday. So I think it'll be a great discussion to see how we want to thread the needle on that. So, and then on the consent agenda, I guess I like the expediency of it, but I also think we often, it hides maybe the multitude of opinions that our council actually has, which I think is also important, because we aren't just a yes machine, I'll call it, and that often there is robust discussion before a decision is made, and it isn't always unanimous. And I think that actually is important, an important fact for the public to understand too. Let's see, Sandy, and then we've got, Stacy, and then Sandra, and then I think we'll move on to the next section.
Oh, did Stacy have her hand up again?
Oh, maybe not. Maybe
okay.
No, okay.
So I agree completely. So I was wondering if there is a way that we could have on a case-by-case basis, have the staff member come in, because I know when I changed my mind over the weekend, and so it was on committee reports, and it was everybody voted yes, and I made the police chief come in, and I felt really bad about that. And I always feel bad when I'm the only dissenting vote, and the staff member has to present all over again. So could there be on a case-by-case basis, have the staff member come in and do the report again, or if we could just as a council have a discussion on it during committee meetings or during committee reports?
Marty?
So the current instruction to staff, and we can change this, is if your item is not on the consent agenda, you're expected to staff your item. And so if it's not on the consent agenda and you need it to be, you're just planning to vote no, and you don't need that person to show up, it's great if you can think of it to tell us that. And then if you're planning to pull something from the consent agenda, maybe you've had a change of heart over the weekend or something. That happens. People contact you all the time. That we have a heads up as staff that you're going to need us to staff it, that there's questions that you have to ask. I don't know that needs to be in the rule, but it's a good practice. Just, because you're right. Sometimes you just want to vote no, and you don't need the chief of police to be there to witness it. But other times you want to ask questions, or you've had questions from constituents and maybe they've answered them over the weekend, but you want it for the public forum, that you feel like other people might have the same question, and it would be useful for everybody to hear what that person has to say, and maybe it's better coming from them. So I think all of that is good, but we just need to have good communication about it, I think.
Jordan?
Yeah, I actually have changed my mind on this. I used to think that only unanimous things should go on the consent agenda, and now I think that things that are less weighty should go on the consent agenda. And a good example too is that we've had resolutions that have passed unanimously that we really want to draw attention to. So we put them on the committee reports, and we have a staff presentation, and it's an opportunity for the public and the press to get additional exposure to those items. And so I feel like the way it's written works for me. It says if it's unanimous or if committee members concur, it can go on the consent agenda. And I think that we can have some discussion about items that are really inconsequential, but are inconsequential is not the correct word, but items that are a lower stake item, where there's not going to be a protracted debate, and someone wants to vote no. I guess I'm comfortable with that being under consent as long as we follow the later rules about that someone may briefly state the reason for requesting a separate vote, but it's not the time for debate. And any council member wishing to have additional discussion shall request it be taken up under committee reports. That's it. If we follow that closely, then I'm comfortable with it staying as is.
Gwen.
Okay, I love going after Jordan because he articulates it so well. So well put there. And I just also wanted to say, I think we all try and be sensitive to staff time regarding their personal lives and expenditures for the city and all of those issues. But Sandra's example of having something on the committee reports, and then she got more information over the weekend. That's fine. Nobody should ever feel bad about that. That's doing our job, and that's just fine. And frankly, I think in some ways it's fine for the community to see that we get more information in, we modify accordingly, and that's a process. And so I just wanted to put that out there. Our job is to ask questions, to vet things, to do it as best we can. And sometimes we're making sausage. It's a little herky jerky. That's okay. And so since we have a lot of new council members, I think that's actually a great example, Sandy, of like, hey, you got more information, learned something, modified, pivoted, that's fine. So just putting that out there. And I think having the flexibility in this to put things onto committee reports, be they something of significance and weight that we want to highlight, even though we're all in agreement, or because we do not agree on it. That's committee reports, and for various reasons, it's towards the end of the agenda just because there's other stuff we got to do first. But I also want to point out, and Marty can talk about this, council meetings used to go to midnight. I think we're pretty efficient. And if we go from 6 to 8 and we're like, oh my gosh, this is a long meeting, it's okay. That's actually, compared to the rest of America, we're actually doing pretty good in terms of a functional council that looks at the substance and handles it professionally. So sometimes we have committee reports and we have to suck it up and do it, but we can do it.
Stacy.
For those of you who are not expert lip readers, Marty mouthed that was not a long meeting for Gwen's example from 6 to 8. So wanted to make sure that was on the record. And I mean, I'm fine with the flexibility. I just would love it if we can figure out, being mindful also of staff, mindful of the clerk staff, making sure that, and I think it might be a good place to have it in the rules of making sure that we let them know ahead of time, if you're planning on, on new knowledge, or that was always the plan, to make sure that you let them know that they're going to divide the question. And I don't know if we need to codify that in the rules. I think it'd probably be a good idea, but just, I always feel for the clerk staff when they're sort of like on the fly having to figure out how to divvy out the consent agenda, because sometimes it can be 10, 13 items and figuring that out. So making sure that we let them know ahead of time is just I think is a courtesy that we should all be doing. And I guess we don't need to change the rules. We can leave it flexible, but everyone now knows my opinion on the consent agenda. Thank you so much.
All right, we got actually I'm gonna take Mirta first just because she hasn't chimed in yet, and then we've got I'll go in opposite order. order. Mirta, Mike, and then Sandy, and then we'll move on to our last couple of items because we have about, I think, 10 minutes left.
Thanks, Heidi. Appreciate it. Sorry, everyone. I'm having internet issues, so I figure turning off my camera might help me stay with you all. I guess I agree with Stacy's rationale as to how the consent agenda should function for the same reasons that she mentioned, but also I think it would provide more clarity to the public. When they see that we all agreed on something and then we take time to divide the question and show that there wasn't a unanimous vote, I think it sends not the wrong message, but just a confusing message to the public and our constituents. And I think we need to factor that in as well when making this consideration. So that's all my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Mike.
Am I correct in my understanding that we can address our rules at any time?
I don't know, Marty.
Yes, it takes 2/3 of you to pass it, but so this is a long overdue overhaul. But at the beginning of the pandemic, we decided to meet at 6 o'clock instead of 7, and it was a quick change, and boom, got that done. So yeah, if something's not working, we'll come back in and amend.
That's what I was getting at. So if we find that this new process doesn't work, we can come back and change it. I'm a fan of not sitting through the same presentation multiple times unless there's a publicly beneficial reason to do so. But speaking for maybe the other new people, I think I reserve the right to have a different opinion later.
Perfect. You're always allowed to change your opinion. Sandra, and then we'll move on to the
Okay, yeah. I just wanted to let the new folks know that also as a courtesy, Lee Griffing asked if you have any questions on the accounts payable to ask before noon on Monday so that she can get an answer for you. And I also wanted to say that since we've been on Zoom, I feel like meetings have been a lot shorter. I remember being in chambers until like 11 o'clock every Monday, and now we're done at 8. So weird.
I agree. There's a lot of times where I'm like, I'm not even going to say anything. Okay, so the next section is Rule 25, which I think is just a cleanup. There was just some rules around the mayor's absence, but it was in a weird spot. And then I think the last issue that was raised was around potential grievances. And I reached out to Angela, who works for the HR department, and it's actually a fascinating conversation. Obviously, as elected officials, like there is it's hard to get rid of us. So there isn't really... it may be an appropriate spot for a grievance policy, but it did raise issues around, for example, things like harassment. Like what would happen if, heaven forbid, like we aren't a group of 12 people that work with each other with like respect and decorum. There are scenarios that have been raised in other councils and other communities where maybe there are situations where harassment is an issue between council members or a council member harassing a staff member. So those are things that happen. Thankfully, they have not happened here. But it is an interesting discussion that I think I think is maybe important to have in the case of running worst case scenarios that Jordan mentioned earlier. I hope none of these would ever come to pass. But if there is something that does happen at some point, I think it would be really useful to have a framework for someone who maybe is experiencing harassment to follow, some guidance. So, Amber?
I'm just curious, would we not be covered as city employees? Wouldn't we be covered under any of the policies along there for the type of harassment that you're talking about?
So I think, and I'll have to pull up my email with Angela. I don't know that we are necessarily like employees, if that makes sense. And so I think it might be prudent to have a parallel rules that maybe are exactly the same as those and the city admin policy, and Marty has probably more to say. I think this is just the beginning of the conversation, so we have, weeks. Marty?
So most HR policies, with respect to the types of claims that have been talked about here, include for an employee, include discipline up to and including termination. But with an elected official, the dynamics are different. And I will say that in my early service, I was aware that a council person had a grievance with another council person, and that matter was handled by the city's HR department. And that's all I know about that situation. I'm kind of surprised that I knew that there was a situation, because usually those sorts of matters, I think that one of the council members disclosed that on the floor, and that's why I know about that. But yeah, there is a bit of a difference between an employee and an elected official, because we're elected by the public. And so discipline up to and including termination is not something that you can do with elected officials.
Yep. Thank you for that context. Let's see. I've got a lot of hands up. I think Gwen is next, and then, Gwen, go ahead.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I feel like in the next couple of weeks, if Angela from HR can provide more information and sketch it out and look at best practices with other places, I don't know that this grievance policy necessarily is institutionalized in our rules, or if rather we have something that references it in our rules, but the actual policy is more of an internal policy. And I don't know much about HR. So that's, but I feel like there are people in the city who know a heck of a lot more about it than me, and we should use that as a resource. So that's my 2 cents.
Absolutely. All right. And then I have Sandy.
So when I originally brought this up in December, I was just mainly concerned about quorum issues. Like if I had a concern with all of council, do I bring that up during the council comments on Monday, or can we have like a miscellaneous disclose, or I guess miscellaneous reports or whatever on for a committee of the whole, so that we don't have to like lash it out on Monday night? Or should I just call up everybody individually? So I was just that was my main concern with this.
Yeah, I think lots of things are solved by, picking up a phone and talking to people. Sorry, Adam just brought me coffee. And I think that's always, what really stood out to me in just the questions that I was asking Angela is that I think a lot of, a lot of how council functions, I think, really relies on communication between members, because we don't, we are elected officials and nobody can fire us. So I think we do have to, pick up the phone, and that's the best place to start, probably. Amber, and then,
Yeah, thanks. And so I wasn't thinking about it in the vein that I think that Sandra is thinking about it. I was thinking about it more as an HR, like a sexual harassment complaint, something like that. So I would be in strong favor if the city policies HR policies don't cover us because we're kind of these pseudo employees and the city can't fire us. So I'm in strong favor of that. I think there is a fine line, and I'm not completely clear, Sandra, what you were asking about here, but I think there's a fine line of what is kind of a political and what is an HR thing. So I think, again, we are 12 individually elected officials by our constituents, and so I think there's a needle to be thread there. So I would just caution that we're careful of making sure we do that. But I'm all in favor of having some HR policies around council, because even though we're all great, not everyone.
I definitely appreciated you raising, I think it just, for me, raising the grievance issue, I think just it spiraled into a whole lot of other issues for me, where I was like, oh yeah, what if, these really like, what if someone was being harassed by another council member? There isn't really, what if I was a victim of something like that? I don't think there is an adequate framework right now for someone to advocate for themselves. And I think that is something that I think we could benefit from, and it might have no use to any of us. But hopefully, if there's a future, a future situation, it would help someone. So I think it is an issue to keep, or a framework that we need to keep discussing as we move this forward. So I think we have like 1 minute left, according to my clock. I'm just gonna make sure we still have no one from the public that is in our meeting, so there's no one to comment on anything. I just want to remind folks, so this will keeping an open item until we figure out how to reshuffle the committees. So there is lots of time to still make suggestions or reread things. And if you have specific amendments, just to get them to Marty, Gwen, Jordan, and myself, maybe within the next week or so we can discuss those the next time we pick this up. Jordan or Gwen, do you have anything to add before we adjourn? Did I miss something?
No, I just would say I took some good notes. I appreciate the discussion. I feel like it's really constructive, and we're fleshing things out. And I think Jordan and Marty and I and Heidi will regroup on some of the phrasing and wording and tighten things up and work on the committee realignments and get this done.
Awesome. I'm glad you took good notes, because I have like single words that I probably will not be able to interpret next time. All right, so with that, I'll go ahead and adjourn, and we'll see each other in the next meeting.